Senator Witkos.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. Well, good evening.
Oftentimes when I'm out in my district talking to school-age children and adults about what's happening in the state, I like to use stories to tell a story. And I'm going to tell you a little story about why I think we're here today and why I think it impacts all of us. And most of us, if not all of us, have taught a youngster how to drive. Or when we were learning how to drive, we were always told to look 150 yards ahead of us. Don't look at what's right in front of the car. And we're told to look 150 yards ahead of us because we want to see what's coming at us. And it's important because then we can take evasive maneuvers if need be. And I think you all can kind of tell where I'm going with this story because what we're doing with this deficit mitigation plan is looking at the front bumper of the car. And I think it's important to understand how we got to this position. And I recall on the last night of session, the night before the last night of session, well, it was the last night of session, we were debating the budget bill, and we abruptly stopped the discussions about 11:30 to conclude our business. And it was certain that we hadn't vetted the entire bill out. And 10 weeks later, the bottom fell out of the budget for a variety of reasons. But that's in the past, and we recognize that, and we want to move forward. And in fact, we've been asked by our constituents all across the state, what can we do to move the state forward? What are you guys doing in Hartford? It's not right that you were left out of negotiations. And as you know, the Republican Party had been pleading for a long time to participate in budget negotiations. And it's funny that all throughout the session, it was Republicans and Democrats working together to pass great pieces of legislation, whether it be in committee or on the very floor of the Senate chamber, except when it came to the budget. And that's where the divide occurred. And then Governor Malloy took the leadership position and said, I want everybody in the room, because this is a problem that must be addressed by all that represent all in the state of Connecticut. And so the Republican leadership had three basic demands in order to meet in closed, confined chambers. As you recall, that was one of the things that we complained about during the budget negotiations, where things are being done behind closed doors. So the three rules that the Republican leaders had was, number one, we have to agree on the size of the budget deficit. Number two, we have to make that known so the general public knows the difficulty that we as a body will have in solving this problem. And number three, the final one, we must make structural changes in the future. And what I say about structural changes, it's like if you were looking down across a river and you put a board down in the middle of the river, damming it up. You stop the flow, but what's happening behind that board? It's building and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, the water's going to go overflow the board, or it's going to go busting through the board. And that's what I believe we've done with this budget, ladies and gentlemen. We didn't address how we're going to deal with the flow of the water. We just put a board in it because we didn't look long-term on how we're going to address the issues that we're facing the state of Connecticut. In fact, why do we do a 2-year budget every year if we're only concerned with the budget that's facing us today? I've heard a lot of the different discussions. I've sat here quietly and patiently, and we talked about a lot of different good points that were brought up, how we've worked together to close fiscal year 16's budget deficit, how we're using one-time revenue sources, or how we're reducing expenditures in a certain category. But if we look at the 2017 column that the two chairs of the committees discussed when they brought it out, they're almost blank. It's like we didn't really address it. And that's the problem. As senator after senator after senator stood up and said, we're going to be back here again next year, same time, same channel, but maybe a bigger dollar amount. And that's not good, because the people of Connecticut finally, when they were following along in the newspapers, and they are following along, they said, I'm glad to see you guys are having discussions. Get it right this time. Don't give us a piece of garbage that you're going to have to come back and say, well, we fixed it this year, but guess what? Oh, sorry, we've got another deficit again in the outlying year. And unfortunately, that's the product that they're getting, because we failed to take the tough actions today to address the structural changes for tomorrow. So I'm going to close by saying that I wish the negotiations had gone a little bit further to adopt a few of the structural changes that the Republican Party so wanted and the citizens of Connecticut so needed. So then we don't have to come back and say, guess what, folks? It's the same old verse, same as the first. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Duff?